The next question then becomes, you've spoken about saving costs, for example, on fresh food, on making fresh food rather than buying takeaways. But what then is the cost to the student if they're in a system that's incentivizing them to go into student accommodation? Because the one issue is getting student accommodation and having the beds for all the students. The next question becomes the cost. How much is subsidized by the state? How much is covered by the university? And how much ends up in a student loan that the student has to pay back years down the line?
Erin, I'm going to tell you how much it costs to provide a new bed and to operate it. It's going to shock you. Okay? The information that I received was doing a lot of research throughout the whole of Southern Africa. Most of the universities that I spoke to couldn't give me this figure. The cost of operating a bed, excluding the actual construction of the room itself, is 16,000 Rand per annum. 16,000 Rand of the students' fees just goes towards operating it. That includes things such as cleaning, maintenance, capital appreciation, depreciation, electricity, water, just the basic stuff without taking into account the actual cost of food. And to provide a bed and to finance a bed is 20,000. So the true cost of providing a bed in accordance with the government's minimum standards and norms and standards is the vicinity of 36,000 per annum. Our students can only afford 20. So 16,000 per annum has got to be found somewhere. So in other words, if we have a brand new bed that is built, the cost to the institution, to the government, to the university, to everyone else, okay, is in actual fact 36,000 Rand per annum. Our students can only afford 420, shortfall of 16,000.
Where does that figure come from?
That's research that I've done at about 8 different universities. I've compiled it all, put it all together, and it's real. It's
so
real.
That's a mean, a kind of aggregate of how much it costs in the first year to build a bed, cover all the maintenance and get it going. 36,000 Rand.
36,000. Now, we've got to reduce that. It's unaffordable, and part of what we set out to do as a company since 2009 is investigate ways of reducing that actual cost, getting it down to an affordable rate through innovative technology, the use of innovative building technology and optimal architectural design within the norms and standards. We believe that the capital cost can be reduced to 16,000 and the operating cost from 16 down to 10, which will take the cost to 26,000. That means we only have a shortfall of 6,000 per bed. Now that's very critically important, and that is the conversation that we're currently having with the Department of Higher Education and Training. We're saying, sit down with us, let us share our building and property development experience with you. Where we start the conversation is, what is affordable? Then we work backwards to what product we can provide for that. But it has to be world class. It has to satisfy the criteria that should be used to define good student accommodation. And that criteria is not bricks, not square meters. The criteria, as per the QI principles under which they actually design, is it must be flexible, innovative, it must create a sense of community, it must be high technology, and then we introduce another 2 elements, which is affordability and job creation. So if we combine those 7 factors, we can still design student accommodation that is of a world-class standard in accordance with the norms and standards, but we can bring the cost down of operating and providing it to 26,000 from 36,000.
And still keep your business going.
And keep all our businesses going.
Sure.
In actual fact, we're not trying to do this just for ourselves. We in actual fact want to feed this into the entire industry. We believe that at some point or other, this 600,000 beds is going to be built by the private sector. We can't build it all. And if we can play a role in facilitating the conversation between government and the industry at whole, that will result in affordable student accommodation that is of a world-class standard, at the same time create endless jobs, then I believe we've ticked all the boxes. And I really believe that the Department of Higher Education and Training is very, very close to the point where we're going to be having this conversation. I believe it's going to be happening within the next 2 months, and I'm very, very excited about being part of that whole entire process, as is everybody in our company.
And I imagine that the student protests, not only at UCT, but at some of our other tertiary institutions, might be further incentive to try and have that conversation, whatever the outcome.
Nothing focuses the mind like an imminent hanging, and right now this crisis is our imminent hanging. We don't need to see this, but I do believe that the students are expressed, not the way that's been expressed at UCT at the moment. That's unfortunate, but the fact that they are disgruntled, I support that completely. I believe they have every right to be disgruntled. There are 600,000 students right now in South Africa that do not have adequate accommodation. It's no one's fault.
How do we know that? How do we know 600,000 students
It's
don't
really
have
quite simple mathematics. I didn't go and count it. I simply said, We believe that, and we're told that we have between 1 and 1.5 million students at university. So I said, let's say a million. Then I look at University of Cape Town, University in Stellenbosch, and the well-financed universities, and 20 to 25% of their students are in accommodation. There's 250,000 beds across the country. That means 650,000 short. So I said, okay, 600,000 beds short.
So it's a
Quite
rough
simple.
estimate.
Yeah, it's a rough estimate,
Yeah.
but I guarantee you we're probably underestimating the problem.
Sure.
Now, the big question is, how did the situation happen? Again, it's no one's fault. Between 1993 and 2009, the proportion of money according to our budget has actually, that it's been used and spent on tertiary education, has been diminishing and it's been decreasing. And our numbers have been increasing. So the universities have been faced with a conundrum. That is increasing student numbers, but a decrease in budget. Since 2009, however, a totally different approach has been taken, and that there's been a massive improvement in the amount of money and commitment from the fiscus and the Department of Higher Education and Training in spending at university. Student accommodation is just part of the problem. The other part of the problem is that we haven't kept up with the total development of adequate academic space. So we grew from 350,000 to a million students at our university. We should have spent 170 billion rand taking up that difference between those points, or invested it. I don't believe we've had the money, and I don't believe we've invested that amount of money. So this crisis that we've got at the moment is purely a crisis of affordability. Huge increase in the number of students because everyone sees tertiary education as sort of almost like the pathway to the future and a successful future. At the same time, we just haven't had the money. The solution lies between the private sector, the universities, and the Department of Higher Education and Training, and the Treasury getting together and talking. Yeah. I believe that conversation is imminent.
But your argument rests on the idea that all students at university need to have a bed on or near campus.
I think that all first-year students should be in residence, and there's a natural transition as we all went through. First year, we were very comfortable in residence, and we needed to be there because of the confidence that we got being part of that intimate community. Second year, you're still okay with it. By third year, you're starting to say, I want to go on my own. By your fourth year, you're able to cope on your own. You know exactly where you're going. So from third year onwards, I think the students can go out and find their own accommodation. They're much more capable of dealing with the broader, bigger world out there. But I really believe that every single student their first year, and possibly the majority in the second year, should be in world-class student accommodation as close to campus as possible. If we did that, our throughput, which is at the moment 18% versus the international average of 25%, will improve dramatically. It will improve immediately to 23%. So in other words, 23% of the total number of students at university will be graduating.
How can you prove that?
Just by simply looking at the statistics. If a student is in accommodation in their first year, the chance of passing is 80%. If they're not, it drops down to 60% and lower. So if I take a 25% improvement on 18%, it takes us to 23% immediately.
Okay.
It's quite simple, really.
Simple maths.
Yeah.
So in terms of your company and what your company does, you sort of skirt on that border between being a commercial operation that does property development at large, your group overall, not just the student accommodation division, and then also what you're arguing now is this kind of service in the interest of further education. Is that something that you can reconcile quite easily when it comes into going into boardrooms and brokering agreements?
I really think so. I think that we've got a thing called sensitive capitalism that's becoming more and more important now, not just pure greedy capitalism we had in the past. I think that we have learned so much. Us Africans have learned so much about sharing, especially as South Africans who are working together. Every time we approach any development, no matter what field it is, we approach it with one overall overwhelming concept, and that is we adopt a holistic approach to everything we do. In other words, we take into account the environmental, the social, the political, the financial, and the physical consequences of everything we do. If what we're going to do ticks all those boxes, then we believe we're onto a success story. We then underpin that with the concept of green skills, green jobs, and the green economy. We believe that if we can go into every business situation with the idea that this is a win-win situation, where we're going to provide a solution to government's problem, which is the overwhelming problem that we've got in South Africa at the moment. Student accommodation is critically important, but our overall biggest problem that we've got in South Africa at the moment is joblessness. So if we can create an environment where not only do we solve the problem of student accommodation, for example, but at the same time create jobs, we believe we're on a win-win situation. Now, out of the 600,000 beds shortfall that we've got at the moment in student accommodation, we believe that the industry can generate 67,000 sustainable jobs for a period of 10 years. And those jobs will be filled by people with unique skills, which skills they'll be able to sell on the international market. The important thing about that as well, once you've got 67,000 people working, That will also give us the opportunity of creating 670 small enterprises, plus minus 67 medium enterprises, and at least 10 large enterprises. That could be the consequence of saving the country's students from not having student accommodation. So there, to me, is green skills, green jobs, and the green economy, while we're solving in a holistic way the student accommodation crisis in South Africa. And where will the money come from? The private sector.